Welcome back to the Producer Podcast. I'm your host, Micah Versman, and today we are joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick works at Kappa Studios, a post-production house out in Burbank, California. Today we're excited to talk to him about filmmaking, Kappa Studios, and how a post-production house can benefit your project. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I really do appreciate you reaching out to us and giving us an opportunity to speak with you about things that people can do to make the process smoother. That's really the end goal for everyone. So.
Yeah, I know. I've been looking forward to this interview. So maybe to start, if you want to just give a little background on yourself and Kappa Studios, in case people aren't familiar.
All good. So personally, I've been in the industry about 20 years. I started off in the visual effects realm as a visual effects compositor. And then from there, I was provided a series of opportunities to work as both a technical director and a VFX supervisor, both in-house and on set, on a variety of feature films. It was a great ride, had a lot of fun doing it. But in the course of that experience, I learned a lot of what to do, but mainly a lot of what not to do. And that collective experience kind of where I am now, and that is as a general manager and project manager for Kappa Studios. Kappa Studios is based out of Burbank, California. And we're a post-production facility that's really trying to work primarily with the faith and family market. It's a challenging market, but we believe that it serves the greater good. And in the course of providing professional level, high quality, high-end post-production services to that demographic means that we need to be creative, not only in how we handle costs, but also in how we try to streamline the post-production workflow to fit within the amount of money that most of these productions have. So it means that we are lean and mean, and that we've had the really great opportunity of being able to identify a lot of areas, not only in post-production, but also in pre-production as well as production, where filmmakers can kind of consider using some of these ideas to help facilitate the process, make it more efficient, and ultimately make it more affordable as well. And one of the things that I always kind of say, and this is based off an old military acronym, it's called the 7 Ps of project management. And it really is just a very general statement. It has an explicative in it, so I will self-beat myself. And the 7 Ps are proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And you can figure out what the P is that I bleeped myself out in. But it's very, very true. So I think that in general, whether you're approaching a production, especially for independent film or any film for that matter, quite honestly, I think it's prudent for people to make sure that they plan everything, which includes post, as part of the process in the very, very beginning. And I think there's several facets to what that acronym, proper prior planning includes. And one is making sure you have a lot of the right people. So things that we come across frequently are productions that work towards saving costs by, for example, not having a DIT on set, digital imaging technician, or oftentimes as well, not having a post-production supervisor involved on their show. Those are just 2 examples, but those 2 roles in particular, I think, are very integral to making sure that what you're trying to create at the very beginning is actually what comes to fruition at the end, while at the same time being responsible with the costs and making sure that you stay on budget. The DIT in particular is someone who really becomes your only technical liaison between what happened on set and what's going to happen in post. So just to give you a brief example of why I feel as though that role in particular is important to make sure you hire the right person, is in scenarios where you have someone creating proxies for editorial. A lot of times what happens on those shows is something isn't done correctly, and then they go into Avid and they do their offline edit. And at a later date, when it comes to do conform process, which is where we take the offline media and link it back to the original camera raw dailies, things don't link up. And it means that we're now spending a considerable amount of time, maybe upwards of 40 hours, doing a manual overcut of the actual raw material on top of a locked cut. It takes a lot of time, and it's often a thing that happens more frequently than I care to recollect. But it's definitely an area where we see a lot of cost overruns. There was a great article done by, I think it's B&H Photo and Video a few years ago about the importance of the DIT role. They have a very good article. I don't want to quote it. You could go check it out. I can go ahead and send you the link, but they do a very good job of breaking down the importance of this role. And I think they even go so far as to touch upon the importance of this role as it relates to having production insurance as well. So remember, that person is ultimately responsible for all of your media, and that is your show. So it's a key role. And I think it's an area for people to consider not skimping on, for lack of a better word. The other thing is post-production supervisor. The post-production supervisor is someone who can help advise the production, your directors, your producers, on what is required, like I said, to make sure that what you're planning at the very beginning is what you see at the very end. What I also like to do is call, like, in in real estate, when you're taking a tour of a house, you'll hear this phrase, the en-suite, right? Basically, it just means there's an attached bathroom, right, to the bedroom. But the idea of the en-suite means adjoining. It's an adjoining bathroom. So I like to do a play in words where I call it post-on-pre, which means post-production adjoining pre-production. I think it's an important thing. And ultimately, to elaborate more on that idea, is that if you can, by all means, get your post-production facility or your post-production supervisor involved in pre-production. They can help you kind of determine what sequences in your film might have visual effects in them. A lot of times people say, oh, there's no visual effects happening in my show. It's just people driving around in cars having conversations. Well, I can't tell you how many times we've had situations where those scenes are shot in a car on a soundstage, and now you've got 50 or 60 green screen composites that you have to complete. And it's often not thought about at the very beginning when breaking down a script, but having that post supervisor involved can help make sure you break down that script in an appropriate manner that compensates or at least allocates time and money for those caveats that people think they don't have, but they very well may have. Also, I think what it does, the post producer also helps make sure that whatever you're trying to do is producible, right? You may have X amount of dollars and you're trying to make a sci-fi film, and that post producer can help tell you and help give you estimates on what the cost of making that happen is going to be, at least as it relates to the post side of things. So those are two really big areas. Just to reiterate, one is making sure you've got kind of the right people involved in the process, that you've got solid people who can help usher the project through the necessary stages, but also people who are involved at the very beginning, who are going to finish things up at the end, that can advise you as to how things you're doing now is going to impact things later. It happens a lot. I guess another thing that I always bring up a lot is if you believe in yourself and you believe in your project, then save money for deliverables. And what I mean by that is that if you've got a project you think is going to get some traction, that you think someone's going to want to distribute, then you're going to need to provide them a set of deliverables so that they can sell your show to different markets. And deliverables cost money. And I would say probably 90% of the time, people don't put any money aside in their budget for the cost of those deliverables. So what that means is they've got a completed show, they've got an audio mix, they've got color, they've got a final master file, and then they'll get a deal with a distributor, and that distributor will hand them what's called the delivery schedule. And in that delivery schedule will be a host of items. And all those items take time and money to manufacture. So I think it's important for people that if you want to be selling your product at the end, that you set aside a certain amount of money to cover those costs. And then I think that along the same lines, and these are just my broad strokes, by the way, Mike, I'm just giving you my big headline. The other one I say is a big one. And that is that if you want to take a task, right, that is meant to be really easy and make it really difficult, then wait to do your credits to the last minute. So credits are just that. They're like, everyone's like, it's just credits, I'll knock that out. And time again, I get directors that come to me or producers that come to me that at the 11th hour are doing all these revisions on the credits. And I've had several shows, one that's even right now that back in January, we effectively finished the show, but we're still making credit adjustments. And the problem there is that if you actually have a distribution deal and we've manufactured deliverables and sent those off to the distributor for quality control, and then you decide or find out later that you have credit obligations that weren't met, or that a name was misspelled, or God forbid someone was forgotten to be included in the credits, now we're going back and remaking things, and we're sending out, and there's additional costs there. So I would say that tackling your credits early, as benign of a task it seems like, tackling your credits earlier in the process save you so much time and money. And it literally is an Excel sheet. Those are kind of my bullet areas, I think, that are important for people to consider. You read a lot, or you come across a lot of productions that, of course, they have challenges with their budget, and they're trying to make ends meet. And it seems like the DIT and the post supervisor are the first ones to go. But your post supervisor really is a great guide, and through everything that you're going to come across throughout your entire production, they're the ones that can help get you good deals on your post production. They can help you with your chain of title, which will be important for when you want to deliver to a distributor at a later date. And your DIT is really your liaison between everything that was happening on the set and everything that's about to happen in post production. And though I understand and I empathize with filmmakers who are trying to look for areas where to cut, I strongly suggest they look elsewhere. And I'm not a DIT, so there you go.
Good to know. So then I guess a couple questions kind of related to those two positions. Is that something like Kappa Studios is able to help filmmakers find, is like good DIT and post-production supervisors, or not really something you help with?
So that's absolutely, so in terms of the post supervisor position, because of a lot of the shows, they're coming to us, they're in post production. Usually means they have not had a post supervisor on the show up until the day they show up here at Kappa Studios. So a lot of what we do is try to offer those services to help usher their show through the post production process. So yes, we do. We have a number of people here on staff, myself included, who've done numerous shows as post supervisors. But of course, it's always important to note that if we're not involved early on in the production or pre-production phase, then how much we can mitigate and control costs is somewhat limited. Now, that's not to say there's things that we can't do. We definitely help out with our clients coming in that maybe have stock footage issues, that need to make sure that chain of title is good. We help in all of those areas effectively. So a lot of the times when the show comes here to Kappa Studios, we are in fact also taking on the role of post-production supervisor. And it's almost required in order just to get the show done, which means that we become the point person dealing with the distributor, dealing with the producers, getting ADR scheduled and talent to come in to record the lines, maybe dealing with visual effects. If there's enough visual effects that are outside the scope of what it is we can handle at a given time, then we have a number of vendors that we communicate with, talk to, help arrange meetings between the producers and those vendors so they can strike deals, and then we manage that portion of the project as well. So effectively, yes, with regards to post supervisors, that is something that Kappa absolutely does help our clients with. When it comes to DIT and doing on-set dailies, we've done a number of scenarios with that. In fact, the Chosen's one series where we've gotten involved with people on set in order to get dailies over to us in time for the guys who are doing the offline cuts to begin editing on the same day, if not the day after. But in terms of having a DIT people on staff, that is not something that we have on staff. But we do have a lot of relationships with people who are DITs that we recommend frequently, and try to provide, contacts for our clients to reach out to and see if they can come to some type of agreement. But yes, in short, the answer is yes.
All right. So then, at what point in the process should a producer start talking to a post-production house about helping them? Should that be taking place as well in pre-production, or can that wait till later on?
I'll tell you, the best shows we have, when I say the best, meaning the ones from a workflow and pipeline workflow standpoint, the ones that go the smoothest, where kind of when I'm in Smartsheet and I'm doing all the project management for a show and I'm setting milestone dates for client interaction and have a delivery date, and the ones that just go the smoothest, like artwork, are the ones where we are involved in pre-production. Okay. And what I mean by that is that they are open to talking to us, sharing with us the script. I'll frequently go through the script and do a breakdown of my own. Typically, when it comes to the breakdown at that stage, we're really talking about the scope of the photography. Will you be using stock shots for your establishing shots? How much stock footage will there be? What vendors are you looking to use? What type of usage rights are tied to those specific stock footage vendors? What are the costs associated with that? Frequently, we come across a lot of shows that drop in stock footage during the editing process, but haven't really vetted out the cost of making sure that stock footage can be purchased at a reasonable price and will cover the territories, the domains, and everything else, like in perpetuity, all their usage stuff at a reasonable cost, right? So part of being involved early in production is to kind of define where those things should be pulled from, so we don't run into problems later in the edit. The other thing that I primarily do as well is I'll read the script for the purposes of visual effects. So we'll get a lot of dramas that people say, like I mentioned earlier, there's no visual effects in there whatsoever. But you'll find little things like, well, it looks like you have a conversation here in a car that's happening at night. Are you going to use a process trailer for that? Are you going to be on a sound stage? And then you start to see the wheels turning and people go, yes, of course. So how can we do that? And that's where we start having a larger conversation. So taking the example of a couple driving down a street inside their car and they're having a conversation, or we putting green screens or blue screens outside that car on a sound stage, or are we going to go ahead and do the poor man's solution where you've got grips out there with lights making it look like lights are going by and you just film it in camera. And all that comes down to what the creative vision is, as well as what type of resources there are available in that production to execute any given plan. But I think just having those discussions with the production team allows them to maybe think about solving certain creative obstacles or challenges in ways that they hadn't thought of before. And of course, for me, my goal is always to provide them options so that they can make their creative intent come to fruition, but also make it happen within the confines of what their financial challenges are. You'll always find you can always make your movies. It just might be a slightly different movie than what you thought, right?
Yes. That is for sure.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, being involved early, I think, is good. So like the script breakdowns, which I think provide some added benefit to the filmmakers, maybe how they should approach certain scenes, how they should approach certain shots, what the potential cost of those in post-production, depending on how they execute those particular things. And I also think it's a good opportunity for us to kind of also quantify, depending on whether or not they have a post supervisor going into production, or depending on whether or not they have a DIT, it allows us to assess what challenges we're going to face later on. And it allows us to be proactive in response to that. For me, it's all about being proactive. How can we try to forecast what issues might come up so that they're not issues when they come up? So.
All right. So then I guess another kind of pre-production question is, what tips do you have for producers when it comes to then budgeting for post? Is it easier to like come to you to get kind of like an estimate of what it might cost, or like what things can they be looking at to maybe estimate what it's going to cost to do a project?
So we get a lot of people. A lot of people will reach out to us, and what they'll do is they will send us a script, right? And that's by far the best way to kind of begin that dialogue. And what they're typically doing is they're asking for us to put together a post budget so they can create a one sheet or a top sheet for the budget for an entire film, and they can approach investors or whomever else they're looking to speak to about their project. And that is a good place to start. I mean, it very much is. It does take time for us to do it, but we kind of do it because it helps form relationships. And it also puts us in an advantageous position where we're involved early in the process. And like I said, I feel like that's really key to making sure that all of your post-production goes as smoothly as possible, is knowing as much information and being as involved as much as possible early on in the process. So if you're a producer and you're looking at moving forward on a particular show, I think it's great. I personally think it's great when they reach out to a post house and they say, hey, listen, I'm looking at trying to get this show up and running. I'm really interested in having you guys possibly do the post. Would you mind putting together some rough numbers as to what it might cost for a total post package that includes A, B, and C? Now, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, but sometimes we get people who will just say, hey, can you give me numbers on a 80-minute film? Well, unfortunately, filmmaking is not a widget making process, right? Every single film is different. So it really requires having a discussion, and it really requires whoever is reaching out to a post house to have a better grasp of what it is they're trying to create. And I think the easiest way for most people to communicate that is with a script or with a treatment. Now, the treatment, of course, is a lot less information for us to unpack, and it means that there's a lot more generalizations made. But that said, the more information or any information absolutely helps you get you to your end goal, which is trying to calculate how much money you need to set aside for your post-production costs. People will tell you there's rules of thumb, maybe 10% or whatever the case is. But honestly, I've I've never seen that always be. I mean, that's just a very gross estimate. It's when I say
Yeah.
gross, not as in gross, as in like it's a macro level, very large generalization that I don't think anyone wants to be held to, because once things show up, the project changes, the scope changes. We're working on a film right now that's a baseball related film. And of course, with COVID, there hasn't been any extras. So you have very dramatic scenes of championship baseball game happening and the seats are empty. So when you're editing that, there's a lot of considerations at play. Like, do you do more tighter shots with longer lenses so the background falls out of focus? How many shots can you afford where you need to show the crowd? Can you bookend your scenes by doing a large establishing visual effects shot at the beginning, maybe one at the end, and everything will kind of fill out itself in the middle? Those are all things to discuss, especially nowadays, to have those discussions early on to really help filmmakers get a grasp of what their potential costs are going to be. So,
yeah, that was good. So then I guess another question I had when you get into the post-production part of the process is, what benefits are there to working just with a post house as opposed to the producer saying, well, I'm going to go hire, this colorist that's out on the East Coast and then the sound designer on the West Coast?
that's a really great question. So I just had an experience recently with an independent film producer who did a phenomenal little film. I don't want to name names or anything, but he did exactly. We've worked with him many times. He's brought projects here. We've been the all-in-one house, right? Where you go to us for your offline editing, your online editing, your color correction, your dialogue editing, ADR, Foley, sound effects, final mix, mastering, and deliverables. Like, he's been through us for everything. But because of budgetary constraints on this particular show he just did, he felt inclined to have to farm it out to multiple people. And it wasn't farming it out to multiple post houses, because he truly was the budget was extremely small. So he had to farm it out to people. So that means that typically what you're doing, if you're getting people who at least understand the process and know their trade, you're typically farming out to people who are working at a post house during the day and at night are working on your project. So from a project management standpoint, you need to take into consideration the very real fact that those people, that the time you're getting from them is not when they're at their peak, right? It's after hours, it's on the weekends. That also means that your project timeline is going to be protracted. It's going to be much longer than had you brought it to a post house who's working on your project at a minimum 40 hours a week, at a minimum 5 days a week. So that it's so much easier to track your project progress with a post house than typically it is with hiring individuals who work out of their homes or are doing it as a second job. Now, I've been that person myself, so I'm not saying anything bad about that. It's just a fact. It's just a reality. When you're at the 10,000 foot perspective and you have a deadline for a distributor to maybe see your project, or maybe you have to deliver the project because you already have a sales agreement in place, I've seen it add a lot of stress. I would say the other aspect, or the other potential downside of farming it out to individuals as opposed to going to a post-production facility, is that it becomes much more difficult and timely to exchange assets between multiple people. So the easiest example to give you would be with visual effects. So during the course of your offline edit, you may have your assistant editor identifying shots within your timeline that are potential visual effect shots. And then the process there on a macro level is to go ahead and export out references, export out plates, ship them off to visual effects facility or artist. They will go ahead and do mock-ups or temp comps, send them back to you, drop them into your cut. The director goes, it looks like it's looking right. Move on to the final stage of compositing. Then there's a whole round robin process of revisions and tweaks until you get your final visual effects. And those have to be dropped back into the cut. And then you conform your final cut for color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're doing that with an individual at home, it's just more cumbersome, right? You're dealing with different download and upload rates. You're dealing with the fact that they are managing the visual effects database, meaning where shots are in the shot timeline, where they are in terms of production status. Are they still temp? Are they finaled? Are they under revisions? Do they have notes? All of that is outside the realm of a centralized unit, which is the post house. So it just means that the person who has elected to use people for different areas of post-production that are individuals working out of their homes. I presume that's what we're talking about here. It's just a lot more management. So going back to the story that I mentioned a moment ago about this one producer, he ran into that exact situation. He had someone doing color, he had someone doing audio somewhere else, and he had us trying to do mastering for him. And there was little things like credits that he wanted to tweak, forgotten credits, some visual effect shots that were coming from an outside vendor to his colorist, who was an outside vendor for us, weren't correct. There was just lots of communication going back and forth, which is great. Communication is awesome, and it's key to a successful project. But I like to call it, it's redundant and unnecessary and superfluous and causes delays. And he got very frustrated with the fact that he couldn't just sit with us and do all of it, right? And he literally said to us, I am never doing that again. I'm bringing everything to you guys no matter what. And it was a tremendous compliment, but it wasn't so much a compliment as much as a critique of how he had chosen to do the project. And we love him. I was so sympathetic, everything we could to make it as painless as possible. And I think that's part of the reason why he said that, is because we tried to make what was ultimately a difficult workflow as painless as possible for him. And in the end, we got it out in time, but there was just a lot of waiting. We had to wait for people to deliver from one person to the next, from that person to us. And it was a big deal.
So, one of the things that, like, growing up watching all the movie BTS, when I think of post houses, I think of the director and the producer sitting in the room, watching it. But I guess a question I have is, because a lot of independent filmmakers aren't based out in LA, like, do you have to come out to you guys while a project's being worked on, or is that something that you can do remotely?
You can do it remote. You absolutely can do it remotely. In fact, we do a lot of color correction sessions remotely. Doing mixing sessions, especially on a 5.1 soundstage or an Atmos, you need to be present. And the reason why is because everyone's home system is slightly different. Mm-hmm. And so our color correction bay, our dub stage, they are regularly calibrated, and they're calibrated to industry standards. They're Dolby certified. And all that means is that you have a common ground from which to work on. It's like an insurance policy. You know that what you're hearing and what you're seeing is the best that it can be when you're here at Kappa Studios. Now, we can do a remote color session, for example. There's a number of ways of doing that. But ultimately, in the end, right, some producers are like, well, I'm not sure what I'm really seeing, right? How can you guarantee that what I'm seeing here is exact perfect? There's always a little bit of a fudge factor. There always is a little bit of a fudge factor when you're doing that. But We've had a lot of success with that. There's a great white paper that was put out by Netflix early last year that addressed this exact issue during the pandemic, how to go about creating client-centric remote workflows for color and sound. And it's a great paper, and it's dead on accurate. All that to say, nothing beats being in person, right? So if you can at least come out for your color review and your mix, you're golden. And we have a lot of people that do that. And what that ultimately means is, like, on your average film, at least your average film for us, that color mix timeline is you're out here for a week. Okay. Most. So that we can do all the work remotely, which means that all of your color prep, your color spotting, maybe even the color correction, it could be done unassisted or it could be done remotely assisted. All of your dialogue editing, your ADR can be recorded remotely. We do that all the time. Your Foley, your sound effects, all of that's taken care of prior to your arrival. And then you come here and we can show you. But that's to say, that to me is the best scenario, right? Having someone present who's in a color and sound calibrated room is the best scenario, but that's not always available to everyone. And so in short, yes, you can do it remotely. Absolutely. I'm just addressing the white elephant in the room. Is it an elephant? Is it white? It's just an elephant.
Yeah, I think it's just an elephant.
Yeah, and that is to say that by all means, if you can come out, please come out. It just makes it a much better experience for everyone. It's the tactile human nature of it, right? Because it's a creative process. It's a collaborative and it's a creative process. And as much as all of the remote technology, I think, has helped facilitate workflows, remote workflows, telecommuting workflows, there's still something cool about being with the person in the room and having a discussion about the color or the sound, experiencing it together, hearing it, and knowing that what you're hearing and what you're seeing is in fact the best it can be. Because the second it leaves us and goes to a theater, all theaters have different systems. Some have their bulbs turned down to extend the life of the bulb. There's just a myriad of variables that get introduced. And at least you can always go to your screening going, well, I saw it here and I know what it could be, so I know where the issue lies, right? But yes, remote workflows are entirely possible, but nothing beats the in-person experience. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so do you find that when you have some of these like first time, or I guess producers that are working with you guys for like the first time, are there common misconceptions or misunderstandings that maybe they have about the post-production process?
Well, I would say we get a lot of shows. We have a lot of shows where it's their first time doing a show, right? And usually you figure that either they'll tell you that outright, but I think most often people maybe have some level of embarrassment for some reason about it, but you can pick up on it. So a lot of our time, not only do we act as post supervisor, but we kind of also show them and teach them in the process. But I would think, to answer your question more directly, I think that the one misconception people have the most is that everything happens instantaneously.
Okay.
And I think that's from 15 years of there being articles in Post magazine and wherever else. Actually, no, don't say Post magazine. In the trades where they purport how fast something is. Like, oh, you can color correct this in an instant, or you can do this in an instant, or you can offload a drive and, this drive has 24 terabytes and it goes this fast. All of those things are true, but it takes time. It still takes time. Especially, people are shooting in 6K and 8K. Transferring material off a drive sometimes takes days, days. And people are like, well, why aren't the proxies made yet? I'm like, well, we're transferring 24 terabytes on a Thunderbolt 3 cable. It's going to take a while. So I think, I'm being a little farcical. I'm being a little bit, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's all that to say that I think probably one of the most common misconceptions is how fast things take. Now, things are considerably faster than they used to be, and we're always trying to find ways, both with technology and new gear, to make the process faster, because time wasted is time wasted, right? And we don't like wasting any time. But yes, that's probably one of the biggest things. I also think that there's a very large gap in information about the delivery process to a distributor, how that whole scenario works. So we do our best to try to help guide productions and filmmakers through that process as best we can, and helping them understand, what is this delivery schedule? What are all these items that are being asked for my movie? How much does all that cost? And that goes back to my earlier comment about possibly, if you can, having a post supervisor involved, or at least speaking to one early on in the process that can kind of give you the numbers, the potential estimate of costs for those types of things, right? Because you're going to go through all this work. You're going to spend 6 months, maybe a year, who knows how long on your show. And it'd be great for people to see it. And in order to see it, you're going to need to have deliverables created. And it's often a cost people just haven't accounted for. So yeah, those are the two things I think most people come in with a misunderstanding about, is that even though it's digital, it still takes time. And that ultimately in the end, there's something called deliverables that to get people to see your film, you're going to have to create, and that usually you're on the hook for. And we work with them to try to pare down deliverables. We'll get these delivery schedules that look like they're from the 1980s, and they're asking for every tape format known to man. We're like, why is this on there? And a lot of times when you call them up and go, do you really need a Digibeta or a Betacam SP version of this 4K HDR color corrected show? Like, what's going on? And they'll be like, oh yeah, you can take that off, and you can take off the PAL one, and then all of a sudden you're taking a deliverables list that was going to cost $20,000 and you're down to $5. But it requires asking those right questions. So.
For sure. Maybe do you want to take a little bit and just talk a little bit more about deliverables? Because that was something until a couple of years ago I had never really heard of, because I had never done anything of a scale that would ever need stuff like that.
So I'll just give you a very broad example, right? So you shot a independent movie. It's a 4K film. It's in 5.1. You have a 5.1 in a stereo mix. It was color corrected in SDR. Maybe it was also color corrected in HDR. Either way, you've got your film completed. You've done all your mastering, and now you have a potential deal with a distributor, and that distributor is asking for, we want a 4K version of your film, in high dynamic range and an SDR. We want an HD version of the film in HDR and SDR. We want a Vimeo-like screener with a watermark on it. We want Blu-rays with watermarks on them. We want DVDs with watermarks on it. We'd also like to have all of the audio delivered to us as separate stems, and they want it in this particular audio configuration. We're going to want a closed caption file. We're also going to want what's called a CCSL, or continuity list, which is effectively a document that details time code and every line said along with the action. That takes a considerable amount of time to generate. There's all these things. It runs the gamut, and every single distributor has a different list, but they always have some common things, and those common things are the ones I just mentioned. And so when you start looking at all these things, and people are like, oh, I need to get captions. Where do I get captions done? How do I do captions? And there's a number of facilities that do that, but that takes time and that's a cost. It's usually costs people hadn't thought about. The CCSL document, when you're finally ready to turn over your film, you've got all of your media asset deliverables and all your legal deliverables or administrative deliverables, whatever that is they're calling it. You now have to hand over this 600-page document that takes a considerable amount of time for someone to create and actually write down every line, action, and who said it and at what time code. And those are vendors that do that work specifically, because usually there's a requirement on the formatting or how it's structured. Deliverables encompass all of those things. Effectively, you are making sure that who you're giving this to is covered for all potential contingencies and all potential markets and all potential requirements by other territories they're going to try to sell your product in. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time. I would say that captions at least take 7 days to have captions created. I think a CSSL document is roughly the same, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how many projects are in-house at the vendor that you approach. And unless you know about those items beforehand, you could be up on a delivery deadline and you haven't even started that process. And that happens sometimes. We see that happening. And those are areas that, because we have been in the industry for, well, at least Kappa has been around for almost 30 years now. And everyone that works here is a veteran of at least 15 years. It's pretty remarkable. We have an extensive network of people that we all rely on, that we all know. And it's funny, it's a very small community. I think at one point, it might have been in the early 2000s, they had estimated that maybe the entire community was like 190,000 people. I don't know, that's a completely random number, and it's over early 2000s. But it seems like that might be true, because you keep running into the same people over and over again. All that to say that, yes, we do whatever we can to try to help our clients navigate the deliverables minefield, as I call it. It's usually a bunch of surprise costs that come up, and they're not even necessarily costs from Kappa Studios. They're just things that everyone needs: caption files, CCSL documents, E&O insurance, and the list goes on. So.
No, I've done just some small stuff before, and it's a lot of work to get it all and get it all.
It is, but that's where you can reach out before you do your next project and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about doing this project. I would be curious what it would cost to do the project with you. Be forthcoming. Say, listen, there are areas about this process that I don't quite understand. Can you take 10 minutes to talk to me about what I'm going to face when my project's done? What has been your experience with deliverables? What would you say is your average cost on deliverables, for X, Y, and Z? Things like that. How much time do you think I need to get my captions done? When should I have the caption process started? All these little things. But that ultimately is what a post supervisor could do throughout your entire production, just not in the you could do it from the very beginning through to the very end. But reaching out to a post house, be forthcoming about where you are in your project, and ask them appropriate questions. And I know that I do that all the time, and I'd hope other places would do that as well to help filmmakers out. And I imagine they do. But give me a call. I'll sit and talk to anyone about anything.
So I have just a couple final wrap-up questions. So first one, I'm just a little curious, how did you get involved on the post side of filmmaking? Because normally you talk to people and they want to be the director or the actors or whatever. You don't meet as many that are like, I want to mix sound or do color and all that.
Well, surely by accident. So I was going to school to be a psychologist, in fact, to work with children in particular. And because I realized that later, very late in my junior year, that I was potentially short on credits for graduation. So I was like, I need to take an elective. So this was in 1995. I just dated myself. We have to edit that out.
Okay.
So I had signed up for a filmmaking class at my school, and it was just not even. It was just like an intro to understand how broadcast, not even film, how broadcast technology works. At that time, there was a company called Quantel. Quantel, I believe, is still around, but they were one of really two players in the digital post-production industry. The other one was Discrete Logic at the time. And these systems cost anywhere from $500,000 to several million dollars. But they were the only ones at the time that were capable of digitizing video, working with it in a digital way, and then outputting digitally. So they were really the forerunners to everything that we all take for granted. At that time, Macs and PCs had nowhere near the hardware capabilities of dealing with any of that stuff. So people built these systems. The Discrete Logic party worked off Silicon Graphics workstations, these enormous refrigerator-side servers. Later, it became Kodak with the Cineon. And then eventually, as Macs got more powerful, people started developing just software-only packages. I think like Nothing Real or Shake was one of them. And then eventually became Nuke and so on and so forth. And that was the evolution. But I started working at the cool school I was at. We had a Quantel edit box. And Quantel was based out of Darien, Connecticut. And they just had a student outreach program that they said, let's start training people how to use these boxes. And it was a smart idea. The more people know how to run the boxes, the more boxes they can sell, right? Because it takes a considerable time to learning how to use these things at the time. So I took the class, and I was just, for whatever reason, I was blessed that I was able to pick up how to use an edit box in a matter of weeks. And I really enjoyed it. I really had a lot of fun with it. And I had a bunch of friends who went out to USC and were in the producing program and were DPs, and that's what they're doing today. But coming from a family of doctors, it just seemed like an intangible career path. Like, what's the path to work in the film and entertainment industry? Everyone has a different story. It's part of the beauty of it, but it's part of the frustration of it. And anyway, so I was working on this box. I was really enjoying the work, and it came towards the end of my senior year, and they reached out to me and said, would you like a job? I'm like, job doing what? And they're like, traveling the world, teaching our new customers how to use the box, and then going to conventions and demoing the technology. And in the 90s, this was a really exciting time. It's when all the digital technology was coming out, all the big manufacturers were jumping on board. Every NAB in Las Vegas was like the greatest Toys R Us convention ever. It was just the coolest. It really was a very exciting time. And so I was really fortunate. They flew me around the world. I went all over the world to these phenomenal post houses, working with really wonderful and very talented filmmakers and visual effects supervisors on this super high-end gear. And I was a very young guy, and I was just blessed. I was really, really fortunate. And I took that experience, and eventually when I left the company, I landed in a post house out here in LA, and that's how I got started. And I never looked back. It's been 20 years, but I've definitely seen an amazing progression, not only of technology, but also in sophistication and software. But it was exciting to see, like I'm fortunate to have the perspective of seeing things like planar tracking evolve over time, you know, or rotoscoping. Like there used to be a program by Puffin Designs called Commotion 2.0. And it was just a really, really basic program, but it was phenomenal at being able to move through frames in real time or cache things and have really good, image reproduction and that's not so taken for granted. Now you've got content aware fill and auto rotoscoping and Mocha. And it's insane to have seen that progression, but it's also fun to have seen how little technologies over the last 20 years have now become mainstream. And so that's how I got started though. And now I think people go to school for it, which is great. But I think there's still a lot of knowledge about how the business of post-production, the business of behind the entertainment industry that a lot of people aren't being taught or aren't being exposed to. So when I have an opportunity to sit with a new guy that comes in, or interns that come from Biola University or Loyola Marymount, which we have them all the time here, I like to try to share with them like whatever I can so that they're better prepared when they go out there. Because that was the hardest part. It's one thing to learn a piece of software or a kit. It's another thing to understand the business. and
Yes.
I've made a lot of big mistakes. I used to
Yeah.
sit there as an artist, like working on a shot, and I didn't understand that. Every shot ultimately has a certain number of hours tied to it, right? And those hours are
Mm-hmm.
what the company's being paid for. And I would sit there with a visual effects supervisor as a very green artist, and they'd like the five most dangerous words, right? To anyone who owns a facility is when your artist goes, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" Right?
Yes.
And I just increased the scope of the project, and the client's like, "That's a great idea. Let's do that." So, and I would get a talk from like the facility owner or whoever's running the project. Can you please not offer up to expand the scope of the project without talking to me first? And I was just jealous and excited about it. But it's things like that. Like, at the time I was naive and I didn't know, and I was really into it. And you get excited. And I run across that all the time, and it's refreshing. It keeps me excited. It keeps me wanting to keep doing the job. But there is a real element. There's a real lesson to be learned there, and that ultimately that this is a business. It's not
Mm-hmm.
an art class.
Yes. So then, my final question uh, for you is a little different, but what advice do you have for filmmakers out there about how to balance time working in the industry with devoting time to your family, your personal life, and all that?
That's a tough question. Work-life balance. Wow. Full disclosure, I've not been the best at that. um, yeah, I have a 17-year-old daughter who is just an amazing child, and I again very blessed because she's turned out amazing. It's not because of me, and, but it is very difficult. So it goes back to the comment I made earlier that people think things happen very quickly just because it's digital. There's still a craft. There's still a trade. There's skills that are being applied, even though it's digital. There's still an eye for detail. There's still the artistic. You're implementing your artistic wishes into an image, and it takes time to craft that. It just means that the processing of it's faster, or the
Mm-hmm.
ingest of it's faster, or how quickly you get to see what you just shot is faster. But everything else is the same. It requires talent. It requires creative discretion. It requires collaboration and communication, and those things take time. So all that to say that yes, it requires a lot of time doing this job. There's just a lot of work that needs to get done in order to meet your timelines and your deadlines. So in terms of work-life balance, it's just tough. It's tough. It takes discipline. I think that's probably been one of the great benefits of people working remotely, though, during the pandemic, is that
Mm-hmm.
you're home, right? So like right now I'm in Burbank and I'm an hour from my house. So it'd be great to sit down and have lunch with my daughter. I'd love to be able to do that. And sometimes I'll bring her down here to work just so I can do that. I'm like, hey, you're coming to work with me so we can hang out, and maybe walk down Magnolia Boulevard and go check out a thrift store, have lunch together. So I think it's important, just like you're scheduling. I guess my answer is just like you're scheduling, what you're going to do every day on a given project. Like today I'm going to make proxies, or today I'm going to go ahead and conform the timeline and prep it for color and resolve, or whatever it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Take that same discipline that you're applying to your trade or to your client's project and apply it to your life. Make time for your child, make time for your wife, have that conversation, even if it's just 20 minutes. 20 minutes is not a lot of time. I mean, I'll be honest, at 20 minutes, there's not a lot I can do in post in 20 minutes, to be frank. But a
Yeah.
20-minute conversation may be all that you need to feel connected with your kid or your wife or your significant other. And I think it'll pay off in dividends in terms of your overall life happiness. Because to forgo that has much bigger consequences. And I've shared that. There's been shows there was one show that I had 9 months with no day off.
Oh, wow.
That's when I was working in visual effects. And it was on a big show, and a lot of the guys and the gals that were working on that show, we were all having family problems. And it was after that I realized I need to be more disciplined about how I handle my career and how I handle time with my family. Luckily, things worked out, of course, but not of course, but just luckily things worked out. But the takeaway is, if I can go ahead and schedule a meeting with you, for example, I can schedule to make sure that I'm home at a certain time to have dinner with my daughter or my fiance. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's good advice and a good note to wrap up this episode with. So thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today.
Well, Micah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time to reach out to us and putting up with my silly antics. So
Not a problem. I had fun. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. Until next time, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.